this past year has obviously been a remarkable year, a tragic year in so many ways. For me, as a doctor who's a reporter, it's been something that I've never seen before, and I've covered all sorts of different stories around the world. I've covered conflicts, I cover natural disasters. I try and understand what happens to people in the midst of these sorts of experiences where their lives are just upended. I will say that you always know that you're probably going to be leaving that area and coming home. And I think it sort of changes your lens on things. Whereas with the pandemic, a worldwide event, we're all affected by this in some way or another. So many people have known people who've either gotten sick or even died, but regardless, we've all been impacted by this in so many ways. And I think that was a fundamental point. There's not many times in our history where the world is sort of galvanized like this. And it's interesting to see how certain human behaviors, how they sort of react to these sorts of threats. If this were an alien coming from another planet, would planet Earth have been galvanized to react to that? In many ways, this was a totally foreign sort of thing coming here that we knew nothing about, and we had to understand how to react. And I think there's going to be a lot of lessons learned. A couple of them I thought were really relevant even outside this pandemic. And one is, I think, a basic idea of how people look at risk in their lives. I mean, obviously, books have been written about this, but I think for a fundamental sort of point of view for me was you could give objective data and say, look, something is 0.5%, carries a 0.5% mortality. That is objective data. And a group of people would say 0.5% mortality. So you're telling me 1 in 200 people may die of this? We better, really batten down the hatches, be careful, take cover. And another group of people may say, well, that means 99.5% I'm good, right? So objective data is one thing, but subjective interpretations is something you have to count on. You always have to anticipate that. And those subjective interpretations, whether it's a pandemic or anything else in our lives, are oftentimes reflective of that person's own experience. They already live a very risky life for whatever reason, the type of work that they do. Being a frontline worker, 99.5% is what they may focus on as opposed to the 0.5%. It's a long discussion, but I think it's worth remembering that objective knowledge is the critical currency, but the subjective interpretation is something you need to appreciate as well. The other thing is that, we call this a novel coronavirus, which it is. But I think a lot of people sort of scoop by the novel part of it. When we say something is novel, that's actually kind of an extraordinary thing to say in the scientific world, something we really haven't seen before, something we haven't experienced before. And leaving aside this virus, just think of yourselves as adults. When is the last time you really experienced something for the first time? And we think of that when we're kids, but as adults, not really. Typically our experiences are built on previous experiences. They may have slightly different tangents, but they're not wholly new experiences. And what I think was surprising in some ways was if something is truly novel, your existing fund of knowledge might actually get in the way because you have a tendency to immediately place things into the box. A box, coronavirus from China. Well, this is going to be like SARS. That's what I remember about coronaviruses from China. Well, SARS ultimately infected only 8,000 people around the world. This obviously was far more contagious. That would have been the wrong box to put it in. H1N1 was the last pandemic. So this is going to be like H1N1. Well, H1N1 was totally different. It primarily affected kids. People were only contagious when they were sick. There was all these differences. So the idea of truly being able to tabula rasa something, be smart, but not be bound to your previous fund of knowledge, I think is a lesson through this pandemic, yes, but I think in other aspects of our life as well. Mm-hmm. And then just finally, I'll say, and again, this sort of germinated from the conversation we had a couple of weeks ago. I think oftentimes people expect science to kind of be like math, right? 2 + 2 = 4, clear cut. Or if someone is being diagnosed with diabetes, a blood sugar above X, if you are fasting, means you have diabetes. That's actually a rare situation where you can have that degree of certainty when it comes to science, inside a pandemic or not. Science, in some ways, is more like an art in terms of the improvisation, the constant learning, the constant changing, rather than these fixed, hard and fast rules. And I think it's hard for people to sometimes accept that. People want a degree of certainty. How likely am I to become infected if I do X? I mean, to give people that degree of certainty, which is what they want, is a very challenging thing to do, and can get, people will then hold you to those sorts of predictions, which can, obviously backfire very quickly. So, I again, building on our conversation, building on your welcoming remarks, I wanted to make some of those comments because I think these were some of the non-intuitive things that I learned. I learned so much about this virus, the transmission, what was going on in China at the time, why this affects certain populations more than others, long COVID, the long haulers type symptoms, how it affects the brain, all these things. I have fully immersed myself in this for a year. And I will say it's been really busy, but I do find some joy in the idea of fully immersing yourself in one thing, and especially in this distracted society in which we live. But the few fundamental points I raised there, Barbara, at the beginning were some of the non-intuitive ones that I think are translatable even outside this pandemic.